People, what was the most awkward risque moment of your life? Back in the day when you could still hook up on Craigslist, I ended up meeting a woman who was 350 pounds of albino queen. I was definitely into it. I took the bus to Harlem, found her building, and discovered it was an 18-floor walk-up. I powered through it in record time, taking 3 steps at a time, feeling adventurous. When I finally got inside, she answered the door barely wearing anything. She had this earthy, Earth Mother vibe, which I found surprisingly attractive. She seemed warm, wise, and pleasant. This was shaping up to be a pretty great night. We ended up on the couch in her living room, and just as things were getting heated, she suddenly stops mid-blowy and asks, "Do you hear footsteps outside?" I did, and then she says the most cliched line ever. "Oh crap, my husband is back early." There had been zero mention of a husband, and there was no sign of anyone else's stuff around. So, naturally, I panic. She tells me to wait on the roof. She points to the window where there's a fire escape, but it's stuck shut for some reason. However, there's a ladder up to the roof, so she pretty much pushes me out the window as the lock clicks. I scramble up the ladder, knowing the fire escape is clearly visible from the window. I got up to the roof, but the door to go back inside is locked, and my clothes are still under her couch in her apartment. So, there I was, totally bare, on a roof in Harlem. I ended up stuck there for about 2 hours. In that time, 2 things happened. First, her husband came home, clearly drunk, and the 2 of them went at it, loudly, and I could hear the whole thing. Second, a tourist helicopter flew by, close enough that I was totally visible to everyone on board. The pilot gave me a thumbs up and a wave, and one of the women in the back pulled out a camera and took several photos of me, my dinglings hanging out. So, somewhere out there, some woman in Texas, Nebraska, or Iowa probably still has a random photo of me, completely bare, hanging out on a rooftop in Harlem. Story 2. I was getting ready to go for a run and was stretching in the basement, just wearing my briefs on a mat. I had just started doing this one stretch where I lay on my back, raise my feet up, and bend them back until my toes almost touch the floor, near the top of my head. It's one of those stretches that makes you feel really flexible when you can pull it off, but it's also a bit of a vulnerable position. Out of nowhere, I hear my sister come downstairs, freezing cold, and she screams my name while laughing. Normally, she laughs when she catches me in that awkward stretching pose, but the scream felt different this time. She told me there was a hole in my pants. I reached down, feeling the bottom of my briefs, but all I could feel were my man marbles. In that moment, I realized she literally saw me with my backside fully exposed and my tater tots hanging out. I immediately panicked. I quickly covered myself, telling her to close her eyes as I bolted to my room. My face turned bright red from embarrassment, and I was super confused because I could have sworn I'd thrown out that ripped pair. Turns out, I probably just threw it in the laundry basket by mistake and didn't realize it was still in rotation. Story 3. I went camping with a group of friends, all of us crammed into the same tent for the night. My brother was with us, and at some point, he decided to hook up, very loudly and very intensely, with a girl less than a foot away from the rest of us. I woke up to a solid kick to the head, and as I tried to process what was happening, the loud moaning made it painfully clear. After that, there was no going back to sleep. They went at it for what felt like an eternity, changing positions, making horrible sloppy sounds during mouth stuff, and generally ignoring the fact that we were all right there. They started around 2 a.m. and didn't finish until the sun was rising. I was awake, pretending to be asleep the entire time. Near the end, I'm almost certain I felt his man gravy hit my sleeping bag. It was horrifying. As if things couldn't get worse, the moment they were done, one of our friends took it upon himself to play birthday sex on his phone, clapping and congratulating them like they just performed an Olympic routine. He even called out his favorite moments and said how proud he was. Meanwhile, I just lay there, frozen in mortified silence, pretending to sleep until it was over. Hands down the most awkward night of my life. Story 4. I hooked up with someone who was in an open relationship, and it was all going pretty smoothly. About 3/4 of the way into the second round, she suddenly asks, "Hey, would you like to stick around and watch that Mitchell and Webb look when we're done?" I was totally caught off guard, but not exactly opposed to the idea, so I shrugged and agreed. We finished up, and I figured I'd just roll with it. So, we ended up on the couch, and that's when her husband walked in. Cue the most awkward 45 minutes of my life. There we were, sitting in complete silence, all of us watching the show without saying a word. The occasional chuckle from the TV only made the tension in the room feel even more obvious. I was trying to figure out how to navigate the situation without making it worse. Do I try to make small talk? Do I just keep quiet? and pray the show distracts everyone? It was honestly so uncomfortable that I almost wished I could have just teleported out of there. Every time I glanced around, it felt like everyone was just pretending things were totally normal, but I could feel the weight of the situation hanging over us. The whole time, I was just counting down the minutes until I could leave without making things even more awkward than they already were. Story 5. While enjoying the pool, completely undressed, at a lifestyle club, I notice a woman floating near the stairs, eerily motionless. At first, I think she might just be resting, but as I look closer, it's clear something's wrong. With my background as a former lifeguard and advanced first aid certification, I spring into action and rush over to check on her. As I get closer, I can see that the woman is unconscious, her face pale and her body limp. I immediately begin by attempting to rouse her with a sternum rub, but there's no pain response, which only increases my concern. She's breathing, but still completely unresponsive. In a panic, I call out for help while holding her steady in the water, making sure she doesn't slip under. A bystander quickly grabs their phone to call 911, while another rushes off to find the woman's friend. As I stay with her, making sure she doesn't drown, I begin to assess the situation further, hoping she'll regain consciousness soon. Moments later, the paramedics arrive, and I explain what happened, giving them all the details before they take over and transport her to safety. The management of the club approaches me afterward, expressing their gratitude for my quick response and asking me to fill out an incident report for their records. I'm still processing everything that happened when it hits me. Amidst all the chaos and the adrenaline, I'm still completely bare. Somewhere in the middle of all this, I realize I'm still bare, making an already bizarre situation even stranger. Story 6. I was at Sephora trying to replace a product I'd gotten in a FabFitFun box. I don't wear much makeup, but I actually like this one, so I figured I'd try to find it. Sephora seemed like the logical place to start. Being prepared, I had taken a picture of the product so I could show it to the staff and make things easier. I walked in, found an employee, and confidently pulled out my phone to show her the photo. That's when disaster struck. I swiped the wrong way, and instead of the product, a picture of my milkers popped up on the screen. Time felt like it stopped. There was no going back, so I took a deep breath, laughed nervously, and said, "Well, now that we know each other this well, can you help me find this?" Then I quickly swiped to the correct photo and handed her my phone, pretending like everything was normal. She was professional and didn't make it a big deal, but I could feel my face burning the entire time. Story 7. I was at one of those on-land surfing attractions at a water park, feeling pretty confident as I stepped up to give it a try. Things started off okay, but within seconds, I lost my footing and got completely swept up in the water. As if wiping out wasn't embarrassing enough, my shorts decided to betray me, sliding all the way down to my knees in the process. So, there I was, flailing around, trying to hold my shorts up with one hand, while using the other to attempt to stand. An impossible task with the water rushing over me. To make matters worse, I was coughing up what felt like half the water park while my wife and kids watched in stunned disbelief. And let's not forget the teens operating the ride. They were frozen, unsure whether to laugh or intervene, as I gave everyone within view an impromptu full moon. At one point, I was simultaneously trying to cover my front, pull my soaking wet shorts back up, and get to my feet without slipping again. It was pure chaos. By the time I finally managed to shuffle off the ride, drenched and thoroughly humiliated, I couldn't even look at my family. My wife was torn between laughing and pretending she didn't know me, while my kids looked like they were ready to crawl under a table. I'm pretty sure the teens will be telling this story for years. Safe to say, I won't be going near one of those rides again anytime soon. Story 8. Me and my girlfriend were doing our deed when her dad walked in at the absolute worst possible moment, literally a second after I finished, and it landed right on her face. It was like a scene out of a nightmare. Time stopped, and all I could do was stare in sheer horror as his expression went from confused to utterly furious in a fraction of a second. I was genuinely tempted to let him grab his shotgun and put me out of my misery right then and there. The embarrassment was suffocating. He told her mom. When she found out, instead of being mad, she thought it was absolutely hilarious. She couldn't stop laughing. Story 9. It was the summer of 2005, and I was in the middle of a long run, a hot, grueling 12-miler. By mile 7, nature was calling urgently, so I was relieved to spot a small restroom at a park. I hurried in, only to realize there were no doors on the stalls. Not ideal, but when you've got to go, you've got to go. Just as I'm settling in, an older man, probably in his 70s, follows me into the restroom. At first, I didn't think much of it, until he stops and starts watching me. As I'm trying to do my business as quickly as possible, he starts asking me a series of oddly personal questions. I don't remember everything he said, but it was the kind of stuff you'd expect to hear in a much less public setting, and all while he maintained unbroken eye contact. I was so uncomfortable I could feel the heat rising to my face, and not just from the summer sun. I wrapped things up as fast as humanly possible, bolted out of the stall, and got back to my run. At the time, I chalked it up to a weird and uncomfortable moment, but as I thought about it later, it really hit me just how gross and invasive the whole thing was. It's one of those memories I wish I could unexperience. Story 10. My wife and I met back in high school, and like most people in love, we couldn't keep our hands off each other whenever we had the chance. Since we didn't get to see each other much outside of school, we made the most of every opportunity. One time, we were at my house and had just finished up. I was feeling pretty thirsty and figured it was safe to make a quick dash to the kitchen to grab some water, completely unclothed. Bad call. Just as I stepped out of my room, my mom came out of hers. We locked eyes for a split second before I panicked and dove behind the couch, crawling back to my room as fast as I could without standing up. My wife still thinks it's one of the funniest things she's ever seen and loves bringing it up anytime we're reminiscing. It's definitely a memory I'll never live down. Story 11. It was a post-divorce fling. He was a sweet guy, and we were finally getting into the mood when suddenly he whispered, "Stop, stop." I froze, looking up, and saw that his face had gone completely pale, almost ghostly. "What's wrong?" I asked, and he gently took my hand and placed it on his chest. I could feel his heart pounding in a way I'd never felt before. His eyes were shut tight, and he whispered, "Arrhythmia. Where's your medicine?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "At home," he replied weakly. It took a while for his heart rate to return to normal. I wanted to call an ambulance, but he insisted it wasn't necessary. When we talked about it afterward, he described the whole experience as a 12. I was shocked, thinking we were barely at a 4 on the scale of intensity. We both agreed that further dating might just kill him, so we decided to stay friends instead. We remained close for a long time after that, but our romantic involvement was over before it really began. Story 12. I was in Sicily on a scorching hot day, wearing my military uniform, which made it feel even hotter. I gambled on letting out a fart, but then panic hit me like a ton of bricks. Oh my God, did I just shart? Or is my bottom just sweaty? Thinking I needed to figure this out before things got worse, I decided to do a quick courtesy wipe. I walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and prepared myself for the worst. I didn't bother sitting down since I was only wiping, so I pulled my pants down a bit, bent over, and went to work. That's when the door suddenly blasted open. I turned my head and saw this Italian guy standing there, his eyes squeezed shut as tight as he could, repeatedly muttering, "Mamma mia!" He had clearly gotten an unintended front row seat to the whole show. So, there he was, getting an up-close look at my starfish and coin purse. Story 13. In RDC back in high school, I was in a bit of a rush trying to get some new pants, and my friend was helping me out. I'm not entirely sure about all the details, but at one point, she had me take off my pants so I could try on different sizes. We eventually found the right pair, but the zipper got stuck on some loose cloth or string. It wouldn't budge, so she dropped to her knees, trying to yank the strings off the zipper. She was really frustrated, muttering things like, "Come on, I'm pulling it," as she struggled. Just as we were trying to figure it out, another girl walked in, and from behind me, it probably looked way worse than it actually was. It definitely felt awkward, but nothing actually happened. Thankfully, no one got in trouble. I think a higher-up might have asked us about it afterward, but nothing really came of it, and we just moved on. Story 14. I decided to take a nap at my dad's house while I waited for my mom to pick me up after a closing shift at work. It seemed like the perfect time to relax, but things didn't go as planned. My stepbrother and his girlfriend ended up coming home while I was napping. I was in my bed, half asleep, when I heard them having a bit of a heated argument about one of my stepbrother's ex-friends. They were still watching a show, but their conversation quickly became more tense, and I could hear them bickering in the background. After a while, I drifted back to sleep. About an hour or so later, I woke up to some sounds I definitely wasn't prepared for. To my surprise, I heard them banging. At first, I wasn't entirely sure what was going on, but then I saw them bear through the crack in the door. The bed was creaking loudly, and I could hear some moaning, though it was a bit muffled with the TV still going. It was hard to make out exactly what was happening, but it was pretty clear what was going on. I just froze in place, unsure of how to react. I felt super awkward and embarrassed, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself. For what felt like forever, I just stayed there, trying to process the situation. Eventually, I managed to gather enough courage to speak up. I quietly said I was going to leave the room, but my words felt so strange in that moment. As soon as I said it, I quickly crawled to the door in the most awkward, speedy way possible, trying not to look, but also trying to escape without making any more noise. Once I got out of the room, I practically ran out of there, trying to act like nothing had happened. It's been months since that incident, and I've only seen my stepbrother a couple of times since then. Each time has been incredibly awkward. He never acknowledged what happened, let alone apologized for it, which made things even more uncomfortable. I've tried to move on, but there's still this strange tension whenever we're around each other. It's like we both pretended it didn't happen, but we both know it did. Story 15. Oh God, my parents used to bring this story up at parties when I was younger, and I didn't have the guts to tell them to stop. But now that I'm older, it's come full circle and is actually kind of funny. When I was little, I was obsessed with stickers, and one of my favorite sets was this rainbow alphabet set. I used to leave different colored letters all over the house in random places, just for fun. My dad, being a cyclist, had just come home after a tough ride in the pouring rain. He asked my mom to bring him a towel, and to avoid tracking mud and rainwater into the house, he started undressing at the door. So here he is, standing in the foyer, soaking wet and completely undressed, when little me comes up and says, "I want my purple O." My dad, clearly confused and embarrassed to be bare in front of me, told me to leave, but I was insistent. He kept saying he didn't know what I was talking about, and I kept saying, "Yes, you do. You have it," and pointed at his well, you know. Apparently, one of those purple letters had ended up on a towel or something, and right there, on the tip of his tip, was a perfect little purple O, circled around. Thankfully, I don't actually remember it. And no, I did not get my sticker back. Story 16. My wife and I were friends with another couple, and sometimes we'd have them over for dinner, maybe play some cards, and enjoy a few drinks. One evening, the husband of the other couple had far too much to drink, and so did my wife. The wife of the other couple didn't drive, so I helped my wife to bed, then threw the other guy over my shoulder, took him out to his car, along with his wife, who was a little tipsy but still able to walk. I drove them home, carried the guy upstairs to their bed, and dumped him there. He didn't even wake up. Downstairs, his wife thanked me and insisted I have a drink before I left. I was still pretty sober, just a mild buzz, since I usually stayed sober enough to take care of people who had overdone it. Now, this woman was absolutely stunning, a lingerie model for Fredericks of Hollywood. As we had our drink, she started getting closer to me on the couch, eventually draping a leg over mine, cuddling up, and mentioning how her husband wouldn't wake up in his state. She went on to say that he often drank too much and couldn't satisfy her. Then she kissed my cheek and told me that she'd always found me sexy. At that point, I had to untangle myself from her, somewhat regretting it because, honestly, she was quite the temptation. I politely told her there was no way I was going through with it. No chance. My wife and I had certain agreements about sleeping with others, but only if we mutually agreed beforehand. It wasn't something that happened randomly. So, I said no, but, geez, in that moment, I was seriously tempted and had a wand that wouldn't quit. She moved back a bit, saying she didn't believe I meant it, and then proceeded to strip. Yes, I stayed to watch. Then, she walked over to block the door, gave me a big smile and asked, "Now, do you still want to leave?" I moved the stunned woman aside, feeling terrible, and walked out, back to my place. Awkward doesn't even begin to cover it. Story 17. I was with my soon-to-be wife before we were married, and we had just walked out of a pretty bad movie, prom night, I think. We didn't even stick around to finish it. We had some time to kill, so we decided to get a little frisky, but I had too many people at my place and her house was too far, so we ended up driving around the block to some newly built, empty townhomes. Doing in the car wasn't new to us, so we picked the darkest spot we could find and got to it. However, not all of the townhomes were empty. Someone pulled up with their high beams blinding us just as she was doing her thing on me in the back seat. We both froze, making eye contact with the headlights and just staring at each other for a second. After a moment, I whispered, "No one really cares, right?" Well, it turns out, we were wrong because about 5 minutes later, as I was getting close, a squad car rolled up. I had to stuff myself back into my pants right as I was finishing, definitely not the best timing. The officers told us to get out of the car, and since my wife was pretty young-looking, 19 at the time, they assumed she was underage. Once we showed our IDs, one of the officers gave us the most disgusted look and told us to find a more private place to have fun. The other officer kept eyeing my wife in her inners, then looked at me with the wet spot on my jeans and just smiled like he was proud or something. Once they left, we got back in the car and drove back to my place. After that night, doing in car became the most planned, spontaneous event we'd have going forward. Story 18. I met this girl at a club, and she seemed perfect. Stunning pale blue eyes, a great body, and shared the same quirky interests I love. We hit it off, talked for a bit, and ended up at her apartment. Things were going well, and we were both ready to take things to the next level when she got on all fours on the bed. And that's when I saw it. A straight line of, well, you get the idea. As a bit of a germaphobe, I immediately started dry heaving and had to rush to the bathroom. I was stuck, trying to figure out how to handle it. Should I suggest a shower together or just be upfront? But the sight was burned into my mind, and I completely lost my desire. I ended up mumbling something about being too drunk, and to make matters worse, she was an exchange student, so right after that, she had to go back to her home country. Looking back, I suspect she might have been open to a second chance, but that was the end of that. Story 19. This is about my then-girlfriend's sister, now my wife's sister. She was dating a guy, and while their relationship didn't start out as anything unusual, there was one key detail. He had a reputation for being well-endowed, enough that people joked about him being able to star in films. One night, she went out with him, and the next day, she came back walking gingerly, moving slowly and hunched over. She told us, "I think I might need to go to the hospital." So, we rushed her to the hospital, all of us joking but still concerned, asking her the usual questions. Are you bleeding? Did he tear something? Her answers were no. When the nurse did the triage and asked the same questions, her sister finally confessed. The pain was in her bottom. Now, the obvious question was whether it was an accident in the back door. But no. Turns out, after an x-ray, her tailbone was broken. What had happened was, during a rather intense moment, he slipped out, and when he was going back in, he accidentally broke her coccyx. She's small, about 5'4", and he's 6'6". By her own description, his size was the length and thickness of her forearm. The story went that they were banging hard and he slipped out, broke her tailbone. They stopped for a moment, assessed the situation, and then continued with just as much intensity. She didn't even feel the pain until the next morning. But here's the kicker. A few weeks later, we were all at Thanksgiving dinner with her very proper, conservative, and racist parents. Her mom kept asking how she broke her tailbone, and my sister-in-law kept trying to avoid the subject. But her mom wouldn't stop pressing. Finally, my sister-in-law slammed her hands on the table and shouted, "A huge black dong broke my bottom, Mom. Is that what you want to hear? I hooked up with a guy last month, and I was getting railed by a black guy with a dong bigger than your holiday candlesticks. And he broke my bottom with his huge black dong." I will never forgive my sister-in-law for the agony of trying not to burst out laughing. I honestly don't remember much of the conversation after that. But for the first time since I'd started dating my wife, her mom was totally silent. For once, she didn't have a word to say. The rest of the night went on, but I couldn't stop laughing about it for weeks. I'd be doing something totally unrelated, and it would hit me again, and I'd burst into laughter. People would ask what I was laughing about, and I would happily share the story. Story 20. I've never told anyone this story, but here goes. I was kinda and did a lot of stupid things. Somehow, I managed to get away with a lot of it because I was good at keeping secrets. One day, I invited a guy over to my house to hang out, and he ended up staying for dinner. Our plan was for him to sneak back into my room after dinner when he left. My house was a single story, and my bedroom window was at the far end of the house, so it seemed like a foolproof plan. I managed to sneak him back into my room to spend the night, since my parents would have never allowed that. Things escalated pretty quickly, and then, of course, my mom knocked on my door. No locks, of course. I yelled, "Hold on," and told the guy to hide in my closet. He had trouble getting in, though, and the lights were off. My mom comes in, and there he is, half in the closet, with the door half open. He was trying to wedge himself in fully while she's talking to me. The closet was making noise, and she noticed. She looked over, and the guy's leg was sticking out, and I panicked and said, "I think a mouse is in there jiggling the door." She couldn't see clearly since it was dark, and her vision wasn't great, so she just shrugged it off, agreed with me, finished what she wanted to say, and left. Meanwhile, I was lying in bed, bare under the covers, praying she wouldn't notice the closet, turn on the light, and see everything. Me, and the guy still in the closet, having never actually left. The next morning, he snuck out early through my window. Somehow, we got away with it. I never did that again. On top of that, the guy was kind of crazy, so our relationship didn't last, thankfully. Story 21. My then-girlfriend and I decided to take a trip to the next big city for a weekend getaway. It was our first weekend away together, So I booked us a room at the nicest hotel I could afford at the time. Nothing too crazy, just a nice 4-star spot. We were in our 20s, so naturally, we started getting intimate before heading out for the night. In the middle of things, my girlfriend got her period. Neither of us noticed until we finished and, honestly, it looked like a crime scene in the bed. There was so much discharge everywhere. On the sheets, the comforter, the mattress, everywhere. We quickly bolted to go grab dinner and see the show, both of us trying to figure out how to explain the situation to the front desk and, honestly, how I was going to cover the damages. Hours later, we returned to the room, and to our surprise, the bed, comforter, sheets, everything was spotless. It was as if nothing had ever happened. To this day, I have no idea if the hotel staff gave us a helping hand with the cleanup or if we both just imagined it. Story 22. I took my son, who was about 7 at the time, to the park one Sunday around lunchtime. The place was packed with parents and kids. We decided to hit the swings for a bit, and after swinging for a while, I leaned back a little too far. Somehow, my shorts didn't follow, and suddenly I found myself with my bare butt and everything else on display for everyone in the park. My knees were pressed against the swing, and there I was, exposed in front of a whole crowd of adults and kids. To make things worse, the only way to get my shorts back on was to continue my backward descent until I hit the ground, which I did as quickly as possible. I then tried to pull my shorts up while lying on my back, hoping nobody noticed too much. Somehow, miraculously, my son had no clue what had just happened. I shot him a look and hissed, "We have to go." "Why?" he asked. "We just got here." I promised him chicken nuggets, and we bolted out of there. I have no idea how many people actually saw, but I wasn't about to make eye contact with anyone. Story 23. Oh wow, that's a memory I didn't need to revisit. Back in my younger days, I used to hit up underground rave and warehouse parties. With raves came the usual party drugs, and with those, well, a lot of questionable decisions were made. One night, I was at this artsy, sexy party, and not long after arriving, I noticed a couple right in front of me, just going at it. Usually, people would sneak off to a private room or step outside to be more discreet. But this couple, they couldn't wait to get down and dirty right there. Having seen it all before, I just carried on chatting with my friends and tried not to focus on them. After all, once you've seen one, you've seen them all. That is, until it felt like I was standing in the splash zone at SeaWorld. Apparently, the woman in this duo had a, unique ability, because as soon as the guy finished, she soaked everyone around them, including me. Some of my friends thought it was the hottest thing they'd seen all week, but I quickly stood up, made my way to the bathroom, and gave myself a full paper towel bath from head to toe. Needless to say, my rave days were already numbered after that, and after that experience, I made sure to stay far away from anyone who couldn't keep their business behind closed doors. Definitely not my thing. Would not recommend. Story 24. I was on vacation with my auntie once to the UK. The apartment we were staying in belonged to my other auntie and didn't have enough beds to cater for us all. I ended up sleeping on the couch with my cousin and her little brother, my other cousin. A few nights before we were to fly home, I was watching the TV on the couch with my cousin sleeping. My girl cousin woke up and came over to me to sit next to me watching the TV. Next thing I knew, she pulled my head around for a kiss, and she did. I was disgusted at first, but she said nobody has to know. So I guess I had also been in the heat for a few days and said screw it. We made out, she gave me a handjay, and we had banged the whole night. We did this every night until we left the UK. Since we came back, I haven't spoken to her since. She keeps asking when we can see each other again through texts, but I don't respond. I wasn't thinking straight those couple of nights, and I'm forever gonna live with the regret that I let my cousin be intimate me. Story 25. I met a girl on a chat platform not long after starting college. Yes, I know, I'm a bit older now. We chatted for a few months, and eventually, we made plans to meet up at her place. Our conversations had shifted toward more flirtatious topics, and we were both teasing each other. On my way there, I started to realize I had agreed to meet someone alone, with no one really knowing where I was going. Back then, online meetups were kind of frowned upon, so I hadn't told anyone. I didn't even have a cell phone at the time. Felt a little like I could have been walking into something sketchy. We had arranged to meet at a gas station, and when I arrived, she drove me to her trailer, which should have been a red flag, but I kept going. Once inside, I quickly realized I wasn't attracted to her at all, not even a little. We spent some time chatting and having a couple drinks, then eventually went to her room. But when things started to get physical, I just couldn't do it. I came up with some excuse about being tired and left her room to sleep on the couch instead. A few minutes later, she came out and decided to sleep on the floor next to the couch, saying she wanted to be near me. Just as I was about to fall asleep, she let out this exaggerated sigh and said, "I'm so frustrated right now." I pretended to be asleep. Story 26. This is definitely not a pleasant story, so if you're looking for something light or entertaining, maybe skip this one. So, my wife had been asking for a very specific ring, a sea turtle design, though I don't have the picture anymore. I had a group chat with my wife and my best friend. My best friend is, well, let's say, not exactly a model of decorum. He finds it hilarious to send pictures of his, bathroom accomplishments at random times. I usually delete them right away, but this time he sent one just as I was heading to the jewelry store, and the messages kept coming while I was driving. I got to the jewelry store and started talking to an older lady who was very sweet, but had a classic Southern charm, the type who says, "Bless your heart." As we were discussing the ring, I suddenly remembered that my wife had sent a photo of a similar ring she'd found online. She had posted it in the group chat. I said, "Oh, wait. I actually have a picture she sent me." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the group chat, with this poor lady standing there watching the screen. And then it happened. As I scrolled, the last image I saw was a very clear and extremely detailed picture of my friend's, well, bathroom creation. Right there, in high definition, as shiny and slick as you can imagine. I froze. She saw it too. We made eye contact, and her mouth just dropped open. I could only manage a mumbled, "Apologies, ma'am, have a good day," before I bolted out of there. I drove home in complete silence, radio off, just reflecting on my life choices. Story 27. During my college years, I had a wake-up call at a party I attended. It was a birthday celebration for a classmate's girlfriend, and I was heavily intoxicated at the time. I suddenly found myself in a situation where people were engaging in intimate acts around me. The first moment of clarity I had was when I realized what was happening around me. I saw my classmate's girlfriend and another girl involved in a private moment, and then my attention shifted to my other classmates, whose actions were increasingly uncomfortable. I quickly shook my head and blinked, trying to clear my thoughts, and when I looked around, I noticed a person from my class who was acting in a way that made me feel very uncomfortable. That moment really sobered me up. I knew I needed to get out of there. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, splashed some cold water on my face, and got dressed. I walked out of the situation and said, "Sorry, everyone. I think I'm tapping out and catching a bus." The ride home was long, and I spent the time reflecting on what had happened. What made the situation even more awkward was that there was a guy there who seemed unaware of what he had walked into. I decided to step in and made sure everyone knew they were welcome to leave if they didn't feel comfortable, with no judgment. The guy immediately stood up and left, and I felt relieved that he had a way out. Years later, when I started my first major job after college, I found out that the same guy had interned for us. The memory came rushing back, and I hoped that he never shared what had happened that night. It was an experience I wanted to move on from, and I was thankful for the lessons it taught me about boundaries and self-awareness. Story 28. The first time my wife, and I tried to be intimate was a bit of an unexpected disaster, though you'll understand why I put it that way in a second. We had been out with some friends, and one of them, a very Russian friend of mine, was determined to get me drunk. Shot after shot of vodka later, I was feeling pretty tipsy, but still coherent. We went back to my place, and out of nowhere, pulled me into my room. Things escalated quickly, and I was feeling overwhelmed in the best way. I'd been in love with her for a long time, and we'd always had this will they, won't they dynamic. I thought everything was going perfectly. However, after a few minutes, my body, probably remembering just how much vodka I'd consumed, decided it wasn't quite up for the task. Not entirely out of commission, but definitely not performing at full capacity. I awkwardly acknowledged it, saying, "Well, I don't think this is going to work," and the mood shifted. I started apologizing, and she began to get dressed. Meanwhile, I was sitting there, frustrated and wishing I could disappear. In an attempt to lighten the mood, I said, "Well, I'm definitely going to make this weird," thinking it might get a laugh. But she didn't find it funny. She quickly finished getting dressed and left the room. I sat there for a moment, completely stunned, trying to process what had just happened. I rushed out of the room, threw on some clothes, and went after her. She'd already grabbed her best friend and was making her way out. I tried to apologize, stumbling over my words, but it was clear she had made up her mind. She stopped me, kissed me again, and said, "It's okay. I'm just going to go home, but it's all good." And with that, she walked off, leaving me feeling like I just messed everything up. I honestly could have died from embarrassment that night. Fast forward 10 years of dating, 4 years of marriage, and plenty of successful moments since, and somehow she still loves my awkward self. Honestly, I have no idea why, but I'm lucky she does. Story 29. One night, my ex-boyfriend was gaming with his friends on Discord, and they were all chatting while waiting for me to get off work. He had just gotten a new VR headset for his PC space exploration game, and he was super excited to show it off. When I got there, he muted himself, and we quickly ate the dinner I'd picked up. Once I was done, he wasted no time and threw the headset on me, excited to watch me try it out. I was spinning around, arms outstretched for balance, trying not to crash into anything. After a few minutes, he came up behind me and started whispering in my ear, first giving me tips on flying the spaceship and then shifting into some more personal comments, including a lot of good girl praise. A little while later, he took the headset off me, pulled me into the bedroom, and things got a little more intimate. But then, he realized he left something in the office, so he casually walked back in to grab it. That's when I heard his friends immediately start repeating everything he had said, including fake kissy and moaning noises. There was a brief moment of awkward silence before I heard a huge crash. He rushed back into the bedroom, looking pretty embarrassed. It turns out he had forgotten that the webcam and microphone were still on and that they had been listening and watching the entire time, thanks to his muting and minimizing the window. They didn't see anything inappropriate, but he was still pretty upset no one had bothered to screenshot his webcam mishap. After throwing his whole setup across the room, he was definitely less than thrilled. Naturally, that totally killed the mood for a couple of hours, but when we finally got back to it, it was much more subdued than before. From then on, our running joke was that we needed to remember to charge our devices before we accidentally released any exclusive content. It ended up being a funny and fond memory from that time. Story 30. I had a really awkward and totally unexpected moment that still gets brought up every now and then. So, just to clarify before I start, my wife knows about this incident and finds it pretty funny, but I can't help but cringe every time it comes up. It happened when my mother-in-law was coming to stay with us for a few weeks after we had just moved into our new house. She was there to help us settle in and get everything sorted. One day, I came home from work, called out to say hello, but no one responded. I thought, great, I have the house to myself for a bit. So I decided to throw my work stuff in the laundry and take a quick shower before they got back. I got undressed, threw my clothes in the washing machine, and ran upstairs to our room. As I opened the door to our bedroom, I was not expecting to find my mother-in-law, freshly showered and completely naked, standing in the middle of the room. She looked at me, laughed, and I just froze while slowly closing the door behind me. I was beyond mortified. She calmly called out, "Don't worry about it, it's all good," but I could barely form words. It was honestly the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me. Now, my wife and her love to tease me about it all the time, joking that I was eyeing up my mother-in-law. They have a pretty wild sense of humor, but it's one of the reasons I love them both so much. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.